Talafalava, aloha, and nisa buluminaka. Hafaday, kia ora and kia orana, and malo lele to all our viewers this evening. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Ara Le Mahelanianto, and I serve as the Cultural Community Organizer here at Utopia, Washington. We have such an amazing program prepared for you this evening. But before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the land which we stand on is traditional territories of the Kosa people, specifically the Duwamish tribe. We want to acknowledge that without their stewardship of this land, we would not be able to access this conversation tonight. We want to honor their lives, past and present, and the land itself. You can help support the ancestral caretakers of this land by paying real rent to realrentduwamish.org. Again, greetings to you all and welcome to tonight's Talanoa panel discussion. It is a privilege to facilitate this conversation tonight, and thank you very much for tuning in. We are so honored that you would be with us on this virtual feed. What is Talanoa? Why are we using the word Talanoa? The word Talanoa itself means dialogue, to have conversation in the Samoan language. But to have a deeper understanding of this word, Talanoa derives from the words tala, which means story, and noa, which means to time. And we like to use this concept as a platform for us to continue having conversations on issues that are important to queer and trans Pacific Islanders. We want to use this platform to highlight the stories of cutie pies everywhere that don't often get the opportunity to have their stories heard. And tonight is one of those opportunities where we want to bring on some amazing folks to talk about tonight's topic, which is the occupational health and safety of sex workers, how sex workers have been impacted throughout COVID, and some of the efforts that Utopia has made to support their needs during this pandemic. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first panelist. Our first panelist is no stranger to this work. She is an unapologetic Fafafine and a trans woman from American Samoa. She is a descendant of celestial navigators, a cat mama, and a lover of all things Pacifica. Agayutupu works as the director of Transform Culture, a program of Pride Foundation using public education, community organizing, and political advocacy to shift culture to keep trans communities safe by changing norms, hearts, and minds one story at a time. She is the co-chair for the Board of Directors of Utopia, Washington. Agayutupu co-chairs for the first ever Washington State LGBTQI Commission. She is also the co-founder and core team member of the Trans Women of Color Solidarity Network in Washington, which provides low to no barrier funds to cover the basic needs of Two-Spirit, Black and Brown trans women and femmes. She uses her lived experience to fight like hell for trans and gender diverse sex workers in Washington, affected by lack of access to healthcare, education, employment, housing, and more. Please give a virtual round of applause for our first panelist, Agayutupu Isis Vienna. Our second panelist needs no introduction as she too is not a stranger to this work. Panelist number 2 brings over 10 years of experience in human services. She previously served 3 years of the Board of Directors and 2 consecutive terms as the Board of Directors Secretary here at Utopia, Washington. As a graduate of Chaminade University with a master's in counseling psychology, she has provided direct services for communities affected by mental illness, substance abuse, and homelessness. She currently serves as the director of programs here at Utopia, Washington, and brings her experiences in hopes to help her queer and trans, gender diverse Pacific Islander community. Please give a virtual round of applause for our panelist number 2, the lovely Tepatasi Vaina. Panelist number 3 serves as the case manager for the Sex Workers Empowerment Initiative, also known as SWAY, here at Utopia, Washington. She is a bridge builder of relationships between the community, providing a variety of assistance to combat homelessness, food insecurity, as well as financial assistance. She loves the work that she does, and nothing inspires her more than to see the power of community and fulfillment when their needs are met. She aims to provide a safe haven for queer and trans-Pacific Islanders who made the long trek here to the Pacific Northwest to better opportunities to thrive while staying true to their authentic identities. Being one of them, Adriana diligently does that work because she envisions better systems and society for Pacific Islanders and eventually the broader LGBTQ community. By promoting herself and self love and self acceptance, Adriana is also responsible for creating several social media campaigns and programs that aims to highlight the best traits and qualities of her community. She aims to provide sacred spaces for trans sex workers to ensure their safety and assuring their voices are amplified in these spaces. Her work of fighting for justice does not just end there. After her shift, she also likes to play, fight against villains alongside Superman, Wonder Woman, and Batwoman. The wonderful work that she does not stop after 5. She continues to take it home with her. How about a round of applause for our panelist number 3, the lovely Miss Adriana, fighting villains Sulai.
Thank you so much, Ara. Hi, everyone.
Well, aloha, ladies, and welcome to our Talanoa panel this evening. I know that we're all family here, so we're just going to have a carefree conversation about the topic. But I want to let you know that it's an honor and a privilege to have you folks here with us this evening. So thank you so much. I know you folks are very busy. I have a very busy schedule, but thank you for taking time out to share your thoughts regarding the topic this evening.
So it's an honor to be in this space with you all.
So I'm going to let the 3 of you restate your name and your pronouns and answer our check-in question, which is, if you were a goddess of any culture, which goddess would you be? And we will start with Anayatupu.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Talo Falava. My name is Anayatupu Isis Vienna. My pronouns are Sunga, which is a Samoan feminine pronoun, or she, her. I would say goddess. I don't want to be predictable and pick someone from the Pacifica region. That's not a dig at the other girls. But I would, and I won't pick my namesake, which is the goddess of fertility, magic, hope, Isis. But I will pick Medusa, who is one of the Gorgos, and who was misunderstood and was a loyal servant to the goddess Athena, but then was betrayed by Athena because of a love, I guess not triangle, but a love thing with Poseidon, and goddess Athena went as far as showing Perseus where to find Medusa, which led to her death. And I think of Medusa as the modern day, if she would be a modern day organizer, fighting to bring down the system, bring down the gods, bring down everything. And that's who resonates with me a lot. As the woman who is often ridiculed and often, I guess, judged, right? But yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Anayatupu. I love that you chose her because I think it speaks a lot to your character as well. You have such a servant's heart, but also you're a force to be reckoned with. So thank you. Tepa, could you please continue on?
Mm-hmm. Hello, everyone. Again, I'm Tepa Vaina.
Adriana, can we move on to you while Tepa gets her thoughts together?
Sure. That's fine. Hi, everyone. My name is...
I can hear you.
We can hear you. Go ahead, Tepa. I'll go after you.
Okay. Sorry, I thought it was on mute. Again, everyone, my name is Tepa Vaina, and my pronouns are she, her. And contrary to my sister Isis, I'm going to be predictable and choose someone from the Pacifica. And also because I don't have that extensive knowledge in Greek mythology and history, as my sister Isis has just talked about. So I choose Nafanua. And a lot of that is because, as much as I say that it's predictable, it's also very unpredictable because I see Nafanua as everything that I'm not. And also because she was just widely respected as a strong person, a strong woman in the Samoan community, but also in her presentation of herself as more of a servant leader to protect her community.
You go, Nafanua. Hi, everyone. My name is Adriana Suluai. I use she, her pronouns. Just to come thinking about goddesses, this goddess, her name was Circe. There's like so many versions of her. In comics, she is a villain. In mythology, she's an enchantress. And that's kind of something that I can relate to, or something I really like, because I'm very much of a fantasy girl when it comes to those type of things. And magic is kind of my top thing to go to when it comes to movies and other sources of entertainment.
That's amazing, and I thank you so much, all of you, for sharing the goddesses that you portray or you emulate in this day and age. I think if I should answer again, my name is Ara. My pronouns are she, her, and if I were to choose a goddess, I would be Sina Le'avele. Because she roams the night and she protects her
If I
gift.
should answer again.
And I think that's not that I roam the night now in my age, but I just feel like I play protector for everyone around. So yeah, if that makes sense. So thank you so much, ladies, for your wonderful answers. We're just gonna dive right into our questions this evening. Our first question um, is what brings you to this work? And I'd like to start with Adriana.
Oh, thanks, Ara. What brings me to this work? Wow, that's such um, a very touching question for me, honestly. I think having lived as a sex worker for survival, it's I want change and change in policies and to end stigma and just to let everybody know that sex work is work. This is why I really love utilizing the platform that I am currently using right now, Utopia Seattle. It's to amplify voices and stories of community, to let them know that what's going on out there, and some of the sources that was meant to protect us are not protecting us. They're actually causing us more harm. And this is why I'm here.
Awesome. Tepa, can we hear from you?
Yeah. So I also come from, I want to say, if I can remember correctly, about 17 years of doing sex work. And I can be honest and say that I wasn't always as open and proud of saying that. And for many of those years, for most of those years, I had a lot of shame in what I was doing and treated it as just something that I needed to do to get by, but nobody needed to know about it until joining Ethiopia, getting involved in the work, even before I became a staff there, I started seeing a lot of empowerment that made me feel like maybe everything that I thought about sex work and the shame that I was feeling was coming from the fact that my feelings towards sex work was dictated by everything that I've been taught. Everything that I've been told that is wrong. And it's really so easy for us to go ahead and just believe everything that we're taught without thinking for ourselves, because it's easy to do so, right? I am very proud of the work that I do right now, not for myself, but hopefully I can help others to realize that about the work that they do. And doing work with Utopia, not only to decolonize and unpack that type of thinking, has really helped me, not only moving forward as an individual in my own personal development, but also in my work.
And I
Knowing
just believe everything that we're taught without
stories
unpack that type of thinking has
to help
really.
others. I'm sorry, everyone. I think we're having some technical difficulties tonight. I hope everybody was able to hear that. Okay, awesome.
Um, okay.
I'm sorry, everyone. I think we're having. I do apologize. We're having a few technical difficulties, but I will move on to Anayotupu. Thank you so much, Tepa, for that answer.
Um,
Isis, please.
yeah, sure. I heard you perfectly loud and clear, sis. So what brings me to the work, similar to Tipa, and it's not shocking because we're all from Samoa and we have the same similar upbringing. What brings me to the work is that as a sex worker who's been in the sex trade since I was 17, over the years, I've seen a lot of my sisters and myself go through a lot of inequities in access, and also seen my sisters suffer from HIV complications without any access to healthcare. Um, Seeing my sisters being arrested. I myself have been arrested and been extorted by cops, and have been targeted by police enforcement, and just having to exist in a world where you don't have the full access of healthcare systems where if I'm attacked as a person, I go, if I'm sexually assaulted, I can't just go to the hospital and not run into, being not being believed for because I'm a sex worker and I was asked. I'm often seen as someone who um, it was my fault that that happened to me, and so I was based on my own lived experience, but also seeing my sisters suffer, my sisters pass from from being in this work and not being protected and not being seen as real work. I sought out support at Utopia, and Utopia was there to support me with housing, with um, accessing employment, with accessing the tools that I have now to to be able to do the work that I do, but also to advocate for the rights of sex workers, of drug users, of poor people, of trans people. So I'm doing this work for to help someone who is, hoping to better their lives the way Utopia has done for me, and to lift up the body sovereignty of sex workers and of all people, especially of women and LGBTQ people.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Isis. I think that it's very important that we educate, especially within our own Pacifica community, the importance of supporting sex work, right? I think it's important that we also use our stories to let people know that women like us on this panel and people like us that are watching, um, we're able to survive through this, right? And I think that's a lot of people don't really realize the power in that. And so in doing the work that we do, or the work that you folks do, it's such a very important and crucial part of helping these individuals. And I think that's what people need to realize. And so, in saying that, we'll go right into the next question. What is sex work, and why is it so important to have conversations about the occupational health and safety of sex workers? And I think I'll start off with Tepa.
Oh, What is sex work? There are many definitions that exist out there about sex work. Some that when you read them, it makes you a little cringe a little bit because of um, just how much it perpetuates stigma. Some that constantly use words such as prostitution, right? That in an effort to demean people like us, people who do sex work. But there are also definitions that I've come across that make me smile because it emphasizes on the fact that for a lot of folks doing sex work, it's about having agency over our body. It's about bodily autonomy, like what my sister Isis mentioned earlier, which when we come to think about it, it has a lot to do with why it's so important for us to continue fighting for decriminalization of sex work. Why should government dictate what we can do with our bodies, right? Um, and that I know that saying that is easy to say, but think about like how many other people or men, right? Do you hear a lot of that happening where government is trying to dictate how men treat their bodies, what they can and cannot do with their bodies? But also, like, if government wants to use every other part of my body, my brain, my hands, or whatever I have in order to like do a job, why do you get to dictate how I use other parts of my body? And so, like, going back to the question, sorry that I kind of like went off a little bit. Yeah, sex work can be defined in so many different ways. Sex work can be the street sex worker. The sex work can also be the woman behind a webcam that's doing online sex work. A sex worker can be um, bikini baristas who lure in customers by that look. Sex workers are also porn stars. Sex workers are also strippers, and sex workers can be defined by in so many different ways, which is another problem that sometimes exists in our own sex worker community is when we try to dictate who is a sex worker and who is not, right? But it's important for us to be able to give people that autonomy to be able to determine for themselves, like, am I a sex worker or am I not? But also, like, looking at sex worker, like, am I a sex worker, and not have to um, put down the ability of others to do that work in whatever way they see comfortable and whatever reasons they have to do sex work in a certain way. Why it's important for us to have conversations like tonight? Well, it's so important because currently, with the criminalized state of sex work, make no mistake, has contributed more to increasing violence against sex workers. And so that is something that we need to continue to talk about, right? Why is it that sex workers continue to face more violence under the criminalized nature of sex work? Well, think about it. If you are told not to do something and you go ahead and do something and you get in trouble doing it, are you going to go back and tell your parents that you got in trouble doing this because they told you in the beginning anyway not to do it? It's the same concept, right? Because sex work is so criminalized, it's hard for sex workers to seek safety and resources and help when they need to, because it jeopardizes their safety already, right? Even more because the work that they're already doing is stigmatized and it's criminalized. So they do not see any trust from the law enforcement and from anyone that's put there that's supposed to protect them.
Say that. That was beautifully said. I can add a bit of fullness. I also want to, I guess, stress that sex workers were anti-sex trafficking, and it's not the same thing, right? We shouldn't be conflating sex work with sex trafficking. We know that. So for folks to understand, folks that are trafficked are coerced, right? And for sex workers, we are either in sex work because of consequence and circumstance, right? Doing survival sex work, which a lot of Black and Brown trans women engage in because there is no other choice. Or there's also choice, right? So the three C's. Coercion is sex trafficking. Circumstance and consequences is and choice is sex work, right? And I want to lift up that, the thing that we're fighting for as sex workers who are anti-sex trafficking is bodily autonomy, right? Every struggle out there is about body sovereignty and the fight against ownership over our bodies, ownership over land, ownership over, just our cultural practices, our resources, and so I want to put that out there. Also, the we're fighting against by uplifting the occupational health and safety of sex workers. We're fighting against the legal and moral stigmata that exists within this work, which um, we are used to, and where a lot of the shame comes from as folks who were raised as someone who was raised in the church, and so that moral stigma causes a lot of shame that often leaves sex workers vulnerable and often pushes sex workers further into places and in spaces where they will engage in risky behavior. And that doesn't just come from the shame of the moral stigma, but also from being criminalized, right? When we criminalize sex work, we're making it easier for the people that we should be targeting, which are people who prey on women, on humans, who are the perpetrators of sex trafficking, of human trafficking. And it pushes sex workers further into those dangerous spaces. And we can talk a little bit about how Decrim will support sex trafficking movement, but we know that if we decriminalize sex work, it'll be make it easier for sex workers to report incidents of sex trafficking, right? And yeah, I'm very honored to have this conversation, but I would also leave some more space for later to talk about it.
Thank you so much, Isis. Adriana, do you have anything to add on to that?
No, they said it pretty perfectly. I mean, sex work is just the consensual exchange of sex between two consulting adults, and nobody has the right to choose for them. And that's kind of like the key importance of having these conversations is to end that stigma, so that way we can ensure the safety of sex workers. It's hard to get services simple as calling 911 if I was encountering some type of danger while doing sex work. Because what's going to happen? Police are out there exploiting sex workers, causing more harm from what they were supposed to do. They were supposed to protect us.
Thank you so much. I know we focused, some of the talk that was mentioned was there's a lot of stigma within our Pacifica communities, and this is the reason why we have conversations like this. So we want to know, what are some common misconceptions and stereotypes that sex workers often face in the Pacifica community, or from your own experiences? Could you please enlighten us? And we'll just keep the same route with Tepa beginning, please. Thank you. Tepa.
Thank you, Ara, for that question. I don't know, that one's a bit tough for me, but thinking about just a lot of like cultural expectations and values that we are raised with. Um, Surely, finding out that one does sex work is um, heavily frowned upon, right? When it's heavily frowned upon, it brings a lot of misconceptions and a lot of stereotypes about the kind of people that we are, right? Um, and that's like why it's so important for us to have these conversations. Like we could be stereotyped as non-Christians, for one, right? Just our morals are questioned, because the reality is the fight for this for sex work, right, is nothing more than just a morality competition. It's about what some people see as moral or not, and that's where a lot of those misconceptions and stereotypes come from about us. I think, in the same way that a lot of trans people are stereotyped as non-Christians, again, but also like we're not very we can't be very successful, or we're not educated, don't have stable careers, all of that. Basically, we are stereotyped as and nothing good in the eye of society, right? Because it's so easy to paint that picture of folks like us when it's so stigmatized. Everything that we are is so stigmatized. And adding that on to the multiple layers of intersectionality that we are, not only we are trans, we are people of color, we're trans women, and we're also sex workers. And that just multiplies those negative stereotypes and misconceptions of who we are. But having these conversations help us to shed light on who we are, right? Like, and who sex workers can be. And sex workers, you know, like some of us are good caretakers of our families, are educated, love their careers, and are have good work ethics. Sex workers can also be, you know, sex workers can be a doctor, sex workers can be a teacher, it can be anything that they want to be. Because as we talked before, sex work is such a wide spectrum of different um, occupations. Like you can do sex work in so many different ways, and just because you are not on the streets doing sex worker does not mean that you may not have that experience, right?
Um, yeah, for me, like stereotypes of sex workers in the Pacifica community, it's sort of like the people know that it's happening, but it's not a stereotype. People know that it's happening, but it's like a lot of things, a lot of tough conversations in our culture. They're often left unsaid, right? Things are often left unsaid um, and swept under the rug. But we know that yes, a lot of Samoan, a lot of Pacifica sex workers, we are it this doesn't just impact us because we do support our families. For a lot of sex workers, we our family are a lot of people in our families are there for safety to make sure that we are getting to a date safely. Or so a lot of times they will also be criminalized, but I would say that is something that is often left out of the story of sex workers is that we a lot of the income that we make does go back to taking care of our families, not just here, but also in our island
Mm.
nations. Um, I would say a stereotype of street sex workers are often seen as sex workers who are unhealthy or who don't practice safe sex, but that happens at any level of the hierarchy that Tippa talked about earlier around cam girls, baristas, and just that hierarchy in general. But the stereotype that girls working on the streets or people working on the streets are, I'm sorry, stereotype that sex workers working on the streets are seen as unhealthy and seen as folks who are most likely to be um, uh, yeah, so like that risky behavior exists at any level, right? In the hierarchy. And for a lot of street sex workers, I know they practice safe sex. They practice, they get tested. They are well aware of their own bodies, and they make sure they're tested. And so like that's a stereotype that needs to be dispelled. Yeah. But for Pacifico communities, it's a lot of trans women who are sex workers. We support our families, and that's the narrative that's often left out of someone's auntie is screaming back there. That's often left out of the that's often left out of the conversation around sex workers being, just um, yeah, narrative of
I
like
hear, I hear
being
you.
workers. Yeah.
Can I just add
Well,
on
thank you
something?
so much, Isis.
So, I know Tippa wanted to add something.
Mhm.
I don't know why I completely failed to mention this earlier, but I need to say that this is one of the biggest misconceptions about sex workers, is that sex workers need to be saved. Not
Mm,
every sex worker needs to be saved, and not everybody that finishes that gets out of doing sex work is a survivor. Um, Maybe they're just champions, right? Because often the term survivor is associated with someone that recovers from doing something that they that was that's not necessarily good for them. And it paints, when you say survivor of sex worker, it paints sex work as a bad thing, right? And so, like, I think that's a good misconception for us to keep in mind, is that sex workers need to be saved. Not every sex worker needs to be saved, right? Victims of sex trafficking need to be saved.
yeah, and also like the idea that sex workers, the majority of sex workers are living these lavish lives and flying around in private jets during the pandemic. No, sex workers. A lot of sex workers are engaging in sex, survival sex, to get their
Mhm.
basic needs met, right? And often when I this moral stigma, it shows up in a lot of conversations I have with clients, where they think that it's immoral, it's against the law, yet we do things that are against the law, like jaywalking is against the law. But they often say like um, they often base it off of their status or looks, right? And for me, the cost of sex work for me, it's the cost to that I need to cover my basic needs and to take care of me. It's not a reflection of how you look, what your status is, what your job is, because there are celebrities who are clients of sex workers, and so there's often this like pushback from men, or from buyers of sex, because they think that it's an insult to them, and when it's really the price that the cost of living for us to take care of ourselves, right, as sex workers. Uh, so yeah, that is often a misconception, that we're living these lavish lives, and flying around in private jets. We're not.
I think
Yes, I yes.
sorry, can I add something on into that? Sorry. Sorry about the noise. My
You're
little ones are
fine.
I think one of the misconceptions that I often hear so much, and it was just off of something that Tepa said about health. Quite so often, I hear of community in their little like talks about if you're a sex worker, you are definitely carrying some type of STD or even carrying HIV. What they fail to realize is that sex workers at their own craft, they aim to like provide some type of security for them. Practicing safe sex is very important to them. Getting tested is something that's very important to sex workers. And
Yes.
that is like one of the misconceptions that bugs me, because it's like, no, just because she's a sex worker does not mean she's a walking, standing bag of HIV. She's most definitely getting tested. Not all sex workers have some type of STD. Everybody's different. Everybody aims to protect themselves. Um, I think another one I hear quite often is sex workers have no future, that they are not going anywhere in life. But needless to say, it's sex workers, they aim to provide for themselves and for their families. Sex worker has provided for myself and my family.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and even if like also the conversation around like HIV, right? Like even if you have HIV, it's okay, right? The stigma around having HIV, it's not a life threatening sentence anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
people who are living with HIV are living, full lives, who take PrEP, right? Or PEP. And a lot of cis hetero folks I know and have met don't even know what PEP is or PrEP
Mhm.
is, right? So, and they don't even see the importance of protecting themselves from getting HIV, or protecting others from getting it, from them giving it to them. So I would say the LGBTQ community at large is mostly, on top of things around, like, making sure that we're tested, but also, like, it's not a life threatening. People who have diabetes have a higher risk of death than someone living with HIV. Also, STIs, there's so much stigma around it. Like, people get tested, they have a shot or a pill or whatever, and you're good, right? So there's a lot of miseducation that happens within schools, or lack of education, because there's often pushback
Mm.
um, sex education, gender education, and we know. Thankfully, we live in a state where they just passed that it's mandatory to have that training or the education in schools, public schools. But yeah, so all of that is just lack of education, and hetero cis folks are often the folks who don't have access, or who don't take advantage of services like PEP or PrEP, or who don't even know about it.
Yeah, I am loving this conversation because, we just covered another layer of like how criminalization affects sex workers, and that what you just talked about is decriminalization of HIV. There are so many messed up things around, like the policies and legislations out there regarding HIV, and that includes the fact that written up. It's not written according to the date that we are in right now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there are resources available now. We need to keep up with science, right? And we're still writing laws that guide HIV as if we are back in the 80s. We need to get with the times. Another thing I wanted to add on is another common misconception of sex workers is that sex work doesn't require any skill. um, Clearly, anybody that thinks that way and thinks that you can just lay on your back and make your money has never done sex work. Because then you would realize that it takes a whole lot more than just lying on your back. You'd realize that a lot of sex workers are some of the most amazing customer service representatives available.
Mm-hmm.
And innovators, right?
Mhm.
It's people
Business
think,
women,
yeah, people
business,
think sex work
yeah.
is purely physical, but a lot of sex work is not. A lot of people are facing isolation, especially in the time of pandemic. And a lot of people who often are looking for intimacy, and I've had clients over the years too, where it was not physical, and like you meet people who are often pushed to the margins, people who are disabled, who just need someone to talk to, who just need intimacy, who just need companionship.
Mhm.
Um, and so, like, there's a lot of miseducation and lack of information that comes from,
Mhm.
like, just based on what we see in media, right? Also, the representation of trans women in media as sex workers, who are often seen as victims who are murdered, right? And that's not although that reality is most prevalent for Black trans women and femmes. That's something we need to combat, but also and to make sure that Black trans women and femmes are safe. But often in media, that's what we're portrayed as sex work being this thing that's just purely physical, but it's a lot more than that. There's a lot more nuance.
Thank you so much for this
And I
informative
add one more
conversation.
thing.
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
And if you want to be radical about it, dating, marriage as sex work, right? There's an
Mhm,
exchange,
mhm.
whether it's you're getting that house or, you know, whatever that ring,
Girl, that ring.
security, which is security, which is what sex workers are looking for, which is security in housing, security in employment, economic security. So
Mhm.
you want to take it there, for the married folks watching. You're doing sex work.
That is something weird.
Yeah,
Another big one
there
is
are
kind
more
of
sex workers than you think.
it's kind of like going on that first date. A guy takes you out on a first date, buys you dinner and all this stuff in exchange for sex, and doesn't think that that's not sex work. That's an exchange right there. You just bought me dinner,
And it's
Oh.
consensual.
and it's consensual.
I want to say thank you so much for just dropping your pearls of wisdom about this subject, because I think that it's such an informative conversation to have, and this
Mhm.
is how this is how we start education. This is how we start slowly bringing folks out of that Stone Age mentality and that the stigma that they have towards sex work and sex workers. This is how it starts, through having conversations, robust discussions like this. So before we go into intermission, I want to ask one question. What are some policies and practices or systems in place that create barriers for sex workers to access safety and health resources? And we'll keep that same route that starting off with Tepatasi.
The first one that comes to mind is Sesta Fosta, which is a really screwed up policy, a really screwed up law that was introduced under the guise of protecting victims of sex trafficking. And that's, you'll notice that a lot of the policies that come under the guise of protecting victims of sex trafficking is, eventually shows up to be um, very harmful for sex workers. Since the release of Sister Foster, and for many of you who may have not heard the term Sister Foster before, Isis and Avi could help you. Sister Foster is Fighting Online Sex Trafficking Act and Stop
Stop it.
Enabling Sex Trafficking Act. So, Stop Enabling Sex Trafficking Act, Fighting Online Sex Trafficking. It was introduced in around 2017 in the last administration. And immediately after that was introduced, Backpage shut down, Craigslist shut down. A lot of websites and avenues where um, trans and gender diverse people who engage in sex work found comfortability and found safety in being able to conduct work were shut down. And we can talk about that a little bit more too, because the reason why I say that a lot of trans and gender diverse folks find comfortability in using those websites, those avenues to conduct sex work, is because it's really dangerous for folks like us to be on the street doing sex work. And that's not just because we have to tell folks that, hey, um, I'm working, right? But also having to disclose that, oh, by the way, I am also a trans woman, or however you identify. And like those different layers of conversation just increases the amount of um, danger that you might be in. And so for a lot of folks, including myself, and I'll speak for myself mostly, we found Backpage and Craigslist and a lot of online media avenues as safe avenues for us to be able to advertise our work, so that we can stay in the safety of our own home. It's not completely always safe, but it was the maximum amount of safety that we wanted to have in doing our work, having that power and that control, because I'm going to be in my home and having someone come over and we can do work here.
Yeah, and some of the other laws that are in place that impact sex workers. I'm gonna make it look. I'm gonna localize it. So in Washington State, or in the city of Seattle, there was last summer they just passed the law to repeal what is it, drug and sex prostitution ordering, right, from the municipal code. And while it's great that they repealed that, there are other ways the police can criminalize sex workers and drug users. So there's a loophole called the soda, or it's called soda, which is stay out of drug areas, and soap, which is stay out of areas of prostitution, and um, which should have been considered in that bill, to make it a bit more comprehensive and to make sure that there was a bit more protection, or as much protections as possible to protect drug users and sex workers. So if you were arrested in an area that was considered a soap or soda area, um, and a lot of people who are sex workers are often arrested in their homes or in areas that are their neighborhoods, right? So they're often, so if you're caught in that area and you've already had an offense, you're criminalized again, right? So that's a way the police can criminalize sex workers without even with the protections that were in place, that were passed last summer. Another I would say policy, not policy, but like a program that often impacts sex workers are diversion programs, right? There's the John schools that are often put in place to criminalize buyers of sex, and it to in some, because of moral stigmata. And when you are impacting, or when you are criminalizing buyers of sex, you're also targeting sex workers who are in need of those funds, right? For us to, for our livelihood, but also by targeting buyers of sex, you create a space, an environment where buyers of sex are now bartering and trying to get the least or the best price for sex. And for people who are living in a pandemic and who are already criminalized and who are already marginalized, it leads folks to a lot of risky behavior, right? Especially as a lot of trans women who are unhoused and have to work out of hotels, out of Airbnbs, out of a person's house. It leaves them especially vulnerable to a lot more risky behavior when it comes to engaging in sex. So a lot of diversion programs that are often seen as these positive, positive models of enforcement, which is just that, it's policing, right? And we want to also talk about LEAD, which is giving. It's a program. It's a program that was started here in Seattle and is now being replicated across the country as a positive model of enforcement. It's just we're giving police access, or to be the gatekeepers, and to be able to, I guess, determine whether someone is worthy of social services, right? That's not their job. And also something that's not often brought up when people talk about LEAD is that there's a one-time exception, right? If police are able to grant that one-time exception, and after that they can do whatever they want. So there's a lot of miseducation that comes with the LEAD program, which is not what we want. We don't want any diversion programs. We don't want to be criminalized. We don't want these what do you call it? These diversion programs that are based on moral stigmata, that perpetuate stigma, but also that are anti-sex worker, that's all based on around how immoral sex work is, and adding that layer of legal stigma to it makes it even worse and further criminalizes people.
Thank you so much, Isis. I think wow, that's just that's a lot to take in. And thank you so much for sharing with us your expertise. Adriana, do you have anything to share
Um,
regarding?
no, a lot of the policies that I had written down was pretty much covered. It's kind of like, to me, it's how much of the harm that has done for a community to where just gaining access to the basic needs has been a problem. Um,
Um, can I add
Yes,
something?
yes, go ahead.
And Tifa, you can also help add some fullness here. But like when we think about laws around anti-sex trafficking, that are often, yes, they're, although the intentions are good, they're often misplaced in some ways where they do target sex workers and make it hard for sex workers who are either engaging in it because of survival or because of choice, of freedom of choice. They target sex workers, but also they're often used to deport migrants, right? That are often left out of sex worker decrim protections. And it's, when we think about the model, the New Zealand model, it's very comprehensive, and it's the, I would say, the best model out there. And we'll talk a bit more about the different models probably later, right? But
Yes.
what's missing from that model is the lack of protections for migrants.
Tepa?
Yeah. So, because we're talking about the health and safety of sex workers doing work, one of the things that I really want to talk about that is a common practice with police and law enforcement is condom confiscation. That's something that needs to stop. For just to give a little bit of context, condom confiscation is a practice that police also use to kind of determine who is out there doing sex work. And if they find you with like a bag of condoms on you, obviously for them it's validation that you are out there doing sex work. And so, in with this practice, it worries a lot of sex workers because if they're found with condoms, they'll be in trouble, and so they're forced to walk the streets sometimes and do work without having contraceptive on them. We're just again talking about like where all of these practices are supposed to protect individuals like us are just contributing to like increasing violence, but also increasing health disparities for sex workers.
Yeah, and if you're so concerned about the, the labor of sex workers, and or around about trafficking in general, like, then you should also be concerned about labor trafficking, right? Which
Mhm.
is modern day slavery, and folks are often forced, right, to give up their labor, and there's a lot of involuntary child labor as well, right? So if you're someone who's anti-sex trafficking, then you should also be concerned about the trafficking of folks who are brought here into this country to perform labor and services, using force and fraud, and using and being coerced, right? You can also talk about the way folks are being trafficked here for adoption, right? For to give birth, and to be used as part of adoption rings. And so I would say that's, a lot of people don't, who are anti-sex trafficking, don't think about those things.
Thank you, Isis. Thank you, Tepa and Adriana, for just educating us on policies and practices that just cause barriers for the sex worker community. Um, we're going to go into intermission right now. I know the girls need a little break. But before we do, I want to explain the video that you're about to see. It's been on social media on the Utopia page for about a week now. But we have. We have formed a cohort of trans and gender diverse folks within the past month and a half, and it's called Totua Trans Leadership Cohort. It consists of 34 members, and they are all trans and gender diverse individuals. This past Valentine's, we were able to start an initiative called "I Can Do That All by Myself." And the reason for this initiative, oftentimes as trans and genderqueer and gender diverse folks, we kind of get depressed, or we fall into a depression when it comes time for Valentine's to be celebrated because of the lack of companionship, right? So, in forming this initiative, we wanted to reaffirm our members that you can do bad all by yourself. You don't need validation from anyone else but yourself. And self love is the main key. And which is why we started this. So each member um, received a love package, which consisted of safety, self-defense items for if those who are engaged in sex work, and also just basic essentials. Things that us, trans and gender diverse folks just love to do, and like lotion and all that good stuff. So here it is. Have a look, and we'll be back. We'll see you in a few minutes. I can do bad all by myself is the theme of this year's Valentine's Day initiative. It is a declaration of power that reassures each participant that they possess all the qualities to be strong, to be bold, and to be independent.
Talanoa. I am Abby McCloskey Torbic Giglione from Afono Leone.
I'm Lenny Tassi.
I am Vailoa.
Vanessa.
I am Tari Williams.
I'm Valerie.
I am Carmen Marico.
I am Lima Schwenke.
I'm Nisha.
I'm Delarenta Tupopo.
I'm Tony with an I.
I'm Everly.
I'm Paris Yando.
Jaina Muo.
Is Nina Filiwai.
I'm Mia.
I am Chena.
I am Alira Keener.
I am Tanya.
I'm Ruby J. Fuala.
I am Aubrey.
I'm Kimmy. The Kimmy.
We celebrate individuality, and we hope that through this initiative, we can foster and encourage self-care and self-love, while also instilling the idea that these qualities live in all of us.
I am Fafa Fabulous, beyond words.
I'm bold.
I'm independent.
I am a hard worker.
I'm fierce.
Resilient.
Mysterious. I am loved. I am kind.
Fiercely unapologetic.
I'm sickening over.
I'm Trave.
And I am beautiful.
I'm ambitious.
I'm sensual.
Sickening.
Bold.
I'm different.
And I'm fierce.
Brave.
Vigilant.
Creative and talented.
And I'm the gold standard.
Through this initiative, each member was gifted a love package. These love packages included self-care items that cater to their health, hygiene, and safety. The goal of this initiative is to not only equip members with self-care tools, but to also empower and reaffirm their individual advocacy.
And I can do that all by myself.
And I can do bad all by myself.
I can do bad all by myself.
I can do bad all by myself.
So welcome back, folks. What a wonderful video. We're so proud of the efforts that our cohort has put forth. They're amazing humans to work with, and I'm so blessed and honored to be working with them. So welcome back, and we're going to continue on with our conversation. Our next question is, what are the different models of decriminalization, and how do they each impact sex workers? And we're going to start with Tepa.
No.
There are several models that exist there around criminalization and decriminalization of sex work. There is often you'll hear a lot of folks talk about we need to legalize sex work. So that is one model, that's legalization, which is the one that's most commonly used. There's also what's called a partial decriminalization, which is more commonly known as the Nordic model. And it's called Nordic model because that is something that's already being implemented in places like Sweden, where it's a partial decriminalization because the selling of sex, conducting sex work is decriminalized, but buying sex is criminalized. And then there's full decriminalization, which is, I'm going to use something that was said in that video, is the gold standard right now. Full decriminalization is what we are aiming for. And the main reason for that is because, yes, whenever I hear legalization, I do admire the direction that it's going towards, but we have to be careful about using that word and using and being lured into that direction, because legalization basically means that, yeah, we may be allowed to do sex work under that model, but it'll be heavily dictated by a system or the government, or any policies that'll be written to basically, again, dictate how sex work will be done. And my fear with that is it's definitely going to perpetuate a lot of harm against queer and trans people, but also especially Black and Brown, Indigenous trans people, because we also don't want there to be any dictation on who is qualified and what look is qualified to conduct sex work, right? So I would say talking a little bit about what legalization looks like. The easiest way to put that is that legalization means that it'll be regulated. Sex work will be regulated, and there are an example of where that already exists today is there are counties in Nevada where sex work is already legalized. But what that looks like right now is you can only perform sex work in certain places or brothels that are like licensed or certified, whatever their process is, in order to do sex work. So they'll tell you where you can and cannot do it, how you can and cannot do it.
Thank you, Tepa. Isis, would you like to add on to that?
Yeah, sis, you're giving me very like karaoke style. I'm living. So I would say so you covered the four, right? Or you covered the most common models.
I covered legalization, I covered partial, which is also the Nordic, and I covered full decriminalization. You can go into more details if you want.
Oh yeah. So I would say those are the main three. Swedish model also like this being it's the Nordic model. And with forgive me if you mentioned this already, but in Nevada, although it's like it's legalized and working, and folks are working out of brothels, and when that happens, it gives someone the ability to determine who is worthy of being of selling sex out of these brothels, right? And if you're someone who's working in a brothel, you can't work out of a bar or anywhere else. You can't sell sex anywhere else other than the brothel, right? So there is there's the full force of being your job being regulated by a brothel owner, and that's what we'll see when there's full legalization. If it were to happen in this country, is that the government will be able to regulate, you know, basically profit off of our bodies, but also determine who's worthy of selling sex and who's not. When I think about the model that we want to replicate or mimic, very comprehensive, and I talked about this before. It's the New Zealand model, which is came at a beautiful time where there wasn't so much censorship and there wasn't this move towards Sister Fosta, and where the internet wasn't what it is now, right? So whereas folks who are advocating for sex worker decrim are fighting, it's an uphill fight, right? But what we don't want is we don't want special or moral laws that zone sex work, right? That push us to the margins, or that stigmatize sex workers by seeing and tagging our work as inappropriate or immoral, because it often makes us more vulnerable to abuse and to violence by partners, intimate partners, who are often folks who target sex workers, and who a lot of my Black sisters are in femmes who, every year a lot of Black trans women and femmes are murdered by folks who have been a partner or intimate partner, right? But also leaves us more vulnerable to abuse by immigration for undocumented folks, right? And migrants, and to just the general public when it comes to people who are buying sex. And I think, although the model is important, we also need to ensure that includes unionization, right? That we need to unionize to work, and we need our rights to be protected, right? So yeah, unionization is very important. And when we think about the history of unions, they were set up to protect folks who are often dealing with low pay, unsanitary working conditions, who did not have a lot of worker rights, right? And that's who we are. And for folks who are working in, whether it's the labor council, right, we're the population that you should be serving, because that's who you start. That's where the genesis of unions come from, right? In protecting the folks who often have access to health, like the occupational health and safety of workers, right? Or healthy occupational health and safety.
So we've okay. So we've identified the models. Thank you so much, Isis and Chipa. Can you please, Adriana, tell us which one of the models poses the least threats to health workers?
I think one of the models that I know, it seems appealing to a lot of politicians, was the Nordic model. But little do they know it's that the Nordic model aims to end sex work. I guess that's one of my biggest problems that I have with that model. It's just that ideal that, people, some sex workers who are in it, or consensual, who want to do sex workers, that's what that model does. It aims to end the demand for it. And that causes a lot of problems for sex workers. Like, it's a 1 foot in and 1 foot out.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for talking about that, Adriana. And I want to add on to what Adriana mentioned, that because it's important for us to highlight on that. The Nordic model definitely and indeed does aim to end sex work. And you think about the concept of it is that you are allowed to sell sex, but you prohibit anybody from buying sex. And so it does not make sense, right? It does not make sense at all. And so it comes like everything else that regarding sex work right now. It comes under the guise of being pro sex work, because we're not going to basically it shows up as We will not penalize you for selling sex. That's what you have to do. But we're going to penalize those who want to buy sex from you. And so, definitely and ultimately, it's going to affect your ability to be able to make your money.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Isis, sorry.
And the Nordic model is often often tied to ending sex trafficking, but you can't end sex trafficking without ending capitalism, right? As long as capitalism exists, there'll always be an opportunity for ownership of our bodies, ownership of land, ownership of anything, of resources, so they'll always exist. But for now, while folks are talking about healthy capitalism or creative capitalism or whatever, as long as capitalism exists, the sex trade will always exist. And what we can do in the time being is to make conditions safer, whether it's the health and safety conditions of sex workers possible, right? For make them safer, so that we are able to call out or report incidents of sex trafficking and report incidents of sex trafficking, but also we're able to join the anti-sex trafficking movement. It's not separate. We're anti-sex trafficking, and So I would say you can't say that you want to end sex trafficking without ending capitalism, and ending labor trafficking or the or just not support migrants as well, right?
Yeah. And I want to say the Nordic model in many ways already exists here in the US today without even realizing it, without us even realizing it. And one way I'd like to just to put things into perspective, I just talked earlier about a recent victory we had with the city of Seattle last year, where we were able to repeal prostitution loitering. And so definitely that's going to prevent law enforcement from like hunting down sex workers that are, walking the streets and what if they suspect that they're doing sex work. But as long as sex work is criminalized, which in fact it is all around the country, sex workers are not completely safe. And so to answer that question you followed up with, Ara, on which of these models poses the least amount of threats to sex workers, it's full decriminalization. Full decriminalization is the ultimate harm reduction strategy. When we talk about like what harm reduction strategies we need to focus on in supporting sex workers, think about how you can ensure the maximum amounts of safety and healthy resources and any essential resources that sex workers can access. They will only be able to truly achieve that when sex work is fully decriminalized. That's when sex workers will only then will sex workers feel truly comfortable and safe to ask for help from the places that they need to seek help with.
I want to add to that is that yes, it's full decriminalization is the least threat to, but I want to suggest full decriminalization with unionization, right? To make sure that we are also getting employment rights, we're also getting sick pay and pensions and whatever, and that we're able to we're afforded the same employment rights as other workers. But also when we think about a lot of times with the conversation around sex trafficking, it's a lot of it is around protecting children, right, so that they're not trafficked. But yet we live in a country that is keeping a lot of children in cages, right? That are there's still a lot of children in cages right now, and also there've been news stories after news story of the government losing children, right, that were deported and kept in detention centers. So if you want to talk about protecting children against sex trafficking, you should also be fighting for the rights of migrants, right?
Awesome. I know you folks have been burning the midnight oil in trying to come up with some sort of strategy or a toolkit to assist sex workers out here, and I want to hone in on that. If you folks could please tell us what is the Shalimar Sex Worker Toolkit, and what can we expect to be included in it?
Isis, you want to take the lead on that?
Sure, if you can talk about the different parts of that. So we the sex worker toolkit, which is something that is created by Sway at Utopia, Washington. It's the Sex Worker Empowerment Initiative. It's very very gay, very queer, just sway, sway here. And it's called the Shalimar Sex Worker Toolkit. It's named after a Pacifica trans woman, a Samoan trans woman who was a sex worker, who was beloved by community and whose life was taken too soon. And people may know her as because of her ties to Eddie Murphy, right? And we know that she was not. It was an accidental death. We know for certain that she was murdered because of that public scrutiny that Eddie Murphy received back in the day, and so we wanted to name this toolkit after her as to honor her story, honor her beauty, honor all of her intersections as Shalimar, and to honor her legacy, but also the history, right? And that she was one of many sisters of many sex workers whose names are often left unsaid and whose lives are often not met with justice. So.
Yeah. And as requested, I will go into a little bit more details about what the Shalimar Sex Worker Toolkit will include. This actually came about, I think, early last year, the idea to create one for sex workers, specifically queer and trans sex workers of color. And so in the process of doing so, and of course, over the last year, 2020 happened the way it happened. It really pushed a lot of our efforts behind. One of the ways that Utopia has been mobilizing to provide support and increase the safety or aim to increase the safety of sex workers is by producing the toolkit that Isis beautifully talked about. And what this is going to look like is that it will be released in 3 phases. And the first phase aims to provide a lot of support, harm reduction strategies, safety strategies, and resources that are available to support sex workers. Organizations that are pro-sex work and are up and ready to give the support to sex workers that they need. This piece is one that will be released in the very next cohort meeting, trans leadership cohort meeting. That our will be working with us on. And also, this piece is only available to sex workers by request, hence why it is only being distributed to the cohort, and of course, when requested by queer and trans sex workers. It's not something that we aim to provide and distribute massively and openly to everybody that don't need to have their eyes on it. And the second piece, which will come later on in the year, is for the general public. And that toolkit provides a lot of support, a lot of education and awareness to everyone, basically, frontline personnel, healthcare professionals, anyone that interfaces sex workers, on how to provide destigmatizing care, knowing how to provide care to a sex worker without diminishing them to one single value of their life, and that's being a sex work. sex worker. And then the last and final piece that Utopia wants to release is a toolkit to provide support and information and resources to other organizations that want to support sex workers on how to be a trusted partner to the sex worker community.
Thank you so much. We look forward to receiving this um, labor of love and hard work of yours through the Shalimar Sex Worker Toolkit. I want to be mindful of folks and their time. So I'm going to go into our last question. And what has COVID-19 taught us about resources and support available for sex workers? Adriana, could you hear from
Yeah,
you?
I can start. So last year, what I noticed about that, there was not a lot of financial assistance that was available for community who engaged in sex work. There was a lot of anxiety that came about and the fear of seeing their clients or engaging in sex work just to make a living because of the fear of COVID. A lot of folks were, what's the word? A lot of the folks, they were good enough to get the stimulus package, but majority of sex workers were not that fortunate. There was a need behind just to receive mental health support and also financial assistance just to be able to survive. Some of the girls have, some of the community engaged in sex work have also started other ways to try to make ends meet. But that was one of the main things that I kind of saw last year was the need for these resources for sex workers.
Thank you so much, Adriana. Would you folks like to add on?
Sure. If anything that COVID-19 taught us about sex workers is that there is still so much work that we need to do around providing the best support and resources that we can to sex workers. Um, COVID-19 responses have intentionally and carelessly excluded sex workers from those responses. Those responses have been here to help a lot of different folks, while sex workers are being excluded and are still being forced to engage um, in sex work. Um, in the midst of the biggest pandemic of the century, putting themselves at risk every night. Why? Because some of them have kids to feed, some of them have families to take care of. And they were not even a thought in the COVID-19 responses that have been released throughout the year. Um, Utopia has, we are a small grassroots organization and we are doing our best to try and bridge those gaps in the resources to our communities. One of the things that I'm so proud of the work that we have done as an organization in last year was making sure and unapologetically making sure that we were providing those resources to sex workers when we saw that nobody else was. Making sure that sex workers were getting more financial assistance when we saw that they applied for our relief fund. Making sure that they were prioritized in our rental assistance. They were prioritized in our food assistance, and they were prioritized in the distribution of care packages and PPEs in order to protect themselves during this time.
Yeah. I also, yeah. So everything that was mentioned, but I want to say that, during the pandemic, during COVID, it was trans sex workers that were out there putting their lives on the line to provide meals and food distribution for the community. It was trans sex workers who were out there supporting the community, even as folks were often targeted with criminalization, who don't have the resources, who don't have stability as far as housing or employment. We were out there doing that work, right? And it's not something new, right? With we see that with from history, we learn from history and seeing how Marsha and Sylvia Rivera were out there supporting our youth and housing folks with the little resources that they had, even with so much pushback from our own community. That's the same thing that we see now, right? And also, it's we for a lot of for BIPOC communities, for Black, Indigenous people communities, people of color communities, trans communities, queer communities, and for a lot of disabled folks, the conditions of the pandemic isn't new to us, right? It's just been worsened and exacerbated. But yet we are innovators of culture. We're innovators of coming up with ways to take care of each other and show up for one another, and creating joy. We saw that with the events that happened over the last year with the Taking Black Pride. And also, I want to put out there that yes, there were so many efforts from nonprofits to show up in a different way, but it shouldn't take a pandemic to do that, right? It shouldn't take a pandemic for city and state agencies to all of a sudden dole out as much money to support poor communities and to support trans communities. And we know that liberation will not occur in the nonprofit industry complex. So I want us to also lift up folks who have been supporting, whether individuals or organizations, who have been supporting our communities in not just formal ways through their jobs in nonprofit, but also in very informal ways, right? And it's how we take care of each other as BIPOC folks, as Black folks, as Indigenous folks. It's nothing new, right? To show up for each other in all of the ways that honor ourselves as whole people, but also it's not mutual aid in the way that it's become this popular, trendy subject. It's not in the way that white folks see mutual aid as. It's based on building trust, building relationships at the speed of trust, and honoring all of our intersections, and showing up for each other, even after you clock out of work, right? Because that work is never ending for us. The political is personal, and this work is very personal to us. So I want to lift up those groups such as the Black Trans Task Force, Trans Women of Color Solidarity Network. There may be some bias there, but all of the groups that are doing this work, trying to navigate the nonprofit world, but also outside of that.
Yeah, and don't apologize, Isis, for lifting up your organizations that are doing hard work around and important work, right? We all need to do that for ourselves, for our organizations, and our partner organizations. So thank you for bringing that up.
Well, ladies, I want to be mindful of your time, but before we close out tonight, I want to express my sincerest gratitude in opening up your schedules. I know all three of you are very busy women, and being open to having this discussion, it's been a delight just listening to your intellect and in all this information, absorbing it. It's given us so much to chew on, so to speak. So, Aftay Lava. For all your hard work for community and all that you do. Thank you very much. Folks, that concludes our Talanoa program this evening. Thank you so much for tuning in. We are honored. We've been honored to have you with us this evening. Please join us for our next month's edition of Talanoa discussion. But before we leave you, please pay close attention to our closing video. In the month, in the 18th of this month, we had our vaccination mobile clinic, and it was just overwhelming to see some of the reaction that community gave towards this event. I won't take much of your time, so just please pay attention to your
screen. You can take all my time, but I'm sorry, Ara. Is it possible for us to share ways people can engage in supporting sex workers?
Of course.
So I want to lift up the work of Decriminalize Washington, which has amazing organizers and groups such as the Greenlight Project, Surge, Trans Women of Color Solidarity Network, and we're hoping to reach out to more BIPOC groups to join those efforts. But I also want to lift up the work that was done by amazing Black and Brown, trans, and gender nonconforming folks, including allies across the country, the Trans Agenda for Liberation. And if you want to learn more about the strategies and demands of government to make to make conditions better and safer for sex workers, check out the Trans Agenda for Liberation on Transgender Law Center's page. And it also covers the need for Black trans women and femmes to lead proudly, fiercely, and to lead this work. So, thank you.
Thank you, Isis. Tepa, do you have any resources you'd like to plug in?
Sure. I would also like to lift up the work of decriminalizing Washington, Surge, Transform Culture, Greenlight Project, and Utopia all together. I also want to lift up the work of other organizations out there that are supporting sex workers, Eileen's as well. I think there are so many organizations such as Black Trans Task Force and Trans Women of Color Solidarity Network that we need to always remember. And thank you, Isis, for always being that wonderful reminder for all of us that we always need to remind ourselves to lift up because they're doing amazing work. Between 9 to 5 and even on the weekends and after that with our community members that need it the most. Utopia has a lot of opportunities for folks to volunteer. We just started doing our monthly sex worker street outreach again. If you want to volunteer, please reach out to Adriana Tuluai here, who will be providing her contact information after. Also, we continue to host our transaction support group every month, which aims to provide a space for trans and gender diverse folks, specifically those with lived experience in sex work, just to come together, talk stories, just like we did tonight, find healing in our stories from each other, share resources, which we can never run out of resources to share with each other, right? But just also like sometimes we just need a space to come and just talk shit.
Yeah.
I'm going to add into what Tepa said. Also, we are having our STI testing clinic at our office twice a month. And it's every third and fourth Wednesday. If you are interested in getting tested, please visit our social media. The application is on posted every other week, just for every folks.
In our stories from each other.
And if you are interested in collecting some safe sex supplies, please give us a call and I can put a bag together for you.
Love you, Adri.
Thank you so much. I love you, Adri. I love you, Isis and Tepa. Any final words? I realize that, I've just been so abrupt with a few of the commentary, but I was just being mindful of your time. But since you've expressed that you want to take up the whole night, that's lovely. I'm here for it. Isis, can you please give us a few final words just to close out and leave folks with just whatever you have in your heart?
Whatever I have in my heart.
Of course, about the subject. And
I would say that final words would be like sex workers, right? We're worthy of safety. We're worthy of dignity and autonomy, of body sovereignty. Also, if you think about who stands to benefit from sex worker decriminalization being a thing, or who stands to benefit from us continuing to be criminalized, it's police, camming sites, all of these OnlyFans, right? All of these websites that have control over how we sell sex and how we have control over our bodies, our decisions we make for our own livelihood. So think about that and let that sit. And hopefully y'all can join us in this fight to decriminalize sex work fully with humanitarian safety. So thank you.
Thank you, Isis. Tepa?
Sex work is work. Sex worker rights are human rights. Treat sex workers with the dignity that they deserve and are worthy of. And last but not least, I really want to take this time to just share how honored I feel tonight to be in this space with all of you and just to have this conversation. It always warms my heart to see just a group of trans folks so strong and just unapologetically doing this work. Never did I ever think before that I would ever find a space where we can openly talk about sex work as we do right now. And that's liberating, right? And that's a beginning to like not only liberation for ourselves in the work that we do, but also for our whole community because we can't go out there and try to make things better for our whole community if we don't come to that realization ourselves.
Yes, say that.
And that is so true. And I too am a testament to what you just said.
And I want to thank Laura so much. You've done a wonderful job being our facilitator tonight and just keeping the conversation going. It's really been a smooth conversation. I just want to commend you for doing such an amazing job tonight.
Oh, thank you so much, Tepa. This is my very first time facilitating and just putting it out there. I wasn't made to be a news anchor, but you know, to just have this conversation with you folks. We had a few glitches in the beginning, but that's fine. Such as life. Adrienne?
Sex work is work. My hips, my body, my mouth, my choice. I get to do what I want with it. I'm not harming myself. Keep your 2 cents to yourself.
Yes, Adrienne, let that remain your choice. Thank you.
You just reminded me of like your hips. So supporting groups like Hips on the East Coast who are doing this work. Glitch reminded me of Glitz who are doing this work on the East Coast. What are the other groups? Star, My Sister's House. All of these amazing groups across the country are doing radical work. We're supporting drug users and sex workers. So I'm sorry, sis. I'll shut up.
No, you're fine. Well, thank you so much once again for all your hard work. I don't have the adequate language to express to you how much it is an honor to not only be in this conversation, but to be working alongside you folks in doing this work. Folks, thank you so much for tuning in. It's been a very productive conversation and a very interesting and informative conversation this evening. Thank you for allowing us to come into your homes and into your devices virtually. But before we leave you tonight, please pay attention to the screen and just see some of the awesome work that we're doing here with community. Good night. So far, once again, I'm RLA, and this is our lovely panel. Have a wonderful night.
Love you.
You're broken down and tired of living life on the merry-go-round, and you can't find a fighter, but I see it in you, so we gon' walk it out. Move mountains, we gon' walk it out and move mountains. And I'll rise up, I'll rise like the day. I'll rise up, I'll rise unafraid. I'll rise up, and I do it 1,000 times again. And I'll rise up, I like the waves. I'll rise up, in spite of the ache. I'll rise up, and I do it 1,000 times again. The silence isn't quiet, and it feels like it's getting hard to breathe. And I know you feel like dying, but I promise we'll take the world to its feet. Move mountains, bring it to its feet. Move and for that we have each other. And we will rise, we will rise, we will rise. Oh, we'll rise. I'll rise up, rise like the day. I'll rise up in spite of the ache. I will rise 1,000 times again.